In the dead of winter, 1876, a German doctor rides deep into the snow-choked mountains of Montana. 23 miles from the nearest soul, he finds a cabin. Silent. Frozen. And inside, a secret that will burn itself into his nightmares forever. Dr. Theodore Brennan kicks through the door, and there they are. Medical records. But not ordinary ones. These records document 5 generations of inbreeding in a single Irish family. But wait, this isn't even the worst part. Because under the floorboards, wrapped in oiled cloth, he finds the preserved remains of 7 infants. Every single one, deformed in the exact same way. And here's the most chilling detail, their parents killed them on purpose. The Donnelly family wasn't just surviving on the frontier, they were perfecting a dark ritual, selective infanticide. If a baby showed even the smallest defect, they erased it from existence. And they'd been doing this for over a century. But Brennan's next discovery? That's where this story goes from horrifying to almost unbelievable. The evidence he uncovers suggests this wasn't random frontier madness. This was a deliberate genetic experiment, designed, refined, and executed with precision, across 2 continents, for nearly 100 years. And now, the question isn't just why they did it. It's how many more families were hiding the exact same horror. This isn't just a story about one twisted bloodline. It's a window into the darkest corners of American history, where the frontier's isolation didn't just hide secrets, it bred them. But to truly understand the Donnelly nightmare, we have to rewind. Not to Montana, but to the rolling green hills of County Cork, Ireland. The year is 1798. The famine is brutal. And a decision is made within the Donnelly clan, one that will curse their descendants for generations. And trust me, what happens next will make you question everything you thought you knew about family, loyalty, and survival. 1874. Montana wasn't just wild, it was barely America at all. Helena, the so-called capital, had just 8,000 people clinging to the edge of the mining boom that built it. Beyond that? Nothing but scattered mining camps, lonely cabins, and native tribes still fighting tooth and nail against the settlers. This was a land where winter killed without mercy, where families could vanish for months, and no one asked questions. The gold rush was dying, the mines were closing, and desperate men were willing to do anything to survive. Supplies were scarce. Medical care? Almost non-existent. And the law? It went only as far as a deputy's horse could ride through the mountains, if he made it back alive. Which made Montana the perfect place for certain people to disappear. People who had secrets. People like the Donnellys. September, 1874. A freight wagon rattles into Helena carrying Patrick Donnelly, his wife Bring, and their 4 surviving children. Seamus, 19. Moira, 17. Colleen, 15. Declan, just 12. From the moment they arrived, something about them didn't fit. Their wooden crates weren't filled with the dusty tools of poor immigrants, they were packed with valuables. Patrick claimed he was a potato farmer escaping the Irish famine. But his hands told a different story, no calluses, no dirt. Instead, ink stains. The hands of a man who kept records, not fields. His accent? Educated, far too refined for an Irish peasant. And Bring, she looked like a woman carrying the weight of 1,000 sleepless nights. Small, pale, always whispering, clinging to her children with an obsession that unsettled even the toughest frontier merchants. And here's the detail that sent chills through town. She always paid in gold coins. Every single one counted. And recounted. Before she'd let it leave her hand. Whatever the Donnellys had come here to do. They hadn't come to start over. They'd come to hide. Bring Donnelly never let go of a gold coin without a fight. Her hands trembled as if each one carried a memory she didn't dare lose. And her eyes? Haunted. Like she'd seen horrors the frontier couldn't even imagine. But here's what nobody in Montana knew. The Donnellys' perfect paperwork was a lie. They carried forged documents claiming they'd lived in Brooklyn for 3 years. Fake jobs. Fake references. So perfect, they could fool anyone. Except the truth. In reality, they'd never set foot in New York. They'd come straight from Ireland. Running from a scandal so dark it nearly tore their village apart. The local parish priest, Father Michael O'Sullivan, a man famous for guarding confessions like a vault, had uncovered something in the Donnelly bloodline. Something he called an abomination against God and nature. And it rattled him so badly. His hand shook when he wrote his warning. What you have done in the name of bloodline purity is a sin that cries out to heaven for vengeance. Leave now, or I will tell every soul in County Cork exactly what you are. That letter was their death sentence in Ireland. Within days, the Donnellys were gone. In Montana, Patrick paid for 160 acres of land in gold, no questions asked. A valley so remote, you could disappear there forever. Accessible only by a twisting mountain trail that turned into a death trap in winter. No neighbors. No witnesses. No way in or out for months at a time. Even their water source, a spring-fed creek, vanished under ice for half the year. The growing season? Just 4 months. The cold? Lethal enough to kill livestock overnight. It was the perfect hiding place for a family with secrets. But also a ticking clock that would test whether they could survive the wilderness. Or turn on each other. In Montana's mountains, one mistake in winter could kill your livestock overnight. And the isolation? 6 straight months with no one around. It had driven other families to madness, even suicide. But the Donnellys? They moved in like they'd done this before. Patrick and his sons built a log cabin that wasn't just sturdy, it was engineered. Thick heat-trapping walls. Tiny windows to stop the cold. Interior partitions they could seal like airtight chambers during blizzards. This wasn't beginner's luck, either they'd survived somewhere like this before. Or they'd learned from experts. Bring and the girls prepared with an almost military precision. Meat was preserved in ways that wasted no space and never spoiled. Crops, chosen specifically for short seasons and terrible soil, thrived in their care. Supplies were rationed with mathematical accuracy. Far beyond what you'd expect from uneducated Irish peasants. But during rare trips into Helena, people noticed something. The Donnellys looked too alike. Pale blue eyes. Angular faces. Long, unnervingly thin fingers. It wasn't just family resemblance, it was uniformity. The children? Brilliant, disciplined, and unsettling. They obeyed instantly, not out of respect, but out of fear. And when Jake Harrison, the territorial mail carrier, overheard them, what he caught in their conversations made his skin crawl. Even in English, they spoke of purity of the line, strength from proper breeding, and sacrifices that must be made for the family's advancement. These weren't the struggles of settlers trying to survive the wilderness. They were the obsessions of people hiding something far darker. And in March 1875, the first sign appeared that the Donnelly secret was about to break wide open. March 1875. The spring thaw finally cracks open Montana's mountain passes after 6 months of total isolation. Jake Harrison, the mail carrier, makes his first run since October. But the moment he reaches the Donnellys' cabin, he feels it in his gut, something terrible happened here. The cabin looks wrong. New boards hastily nailed over holes in the walls. Fresh chinking stuffed into cracks like someone was hiding damage. Outside, patches of freshly disturbed earth, dug up despite the frozen ground. And then, the smell. A thick, sickly sweet stench that Jake knows all too well from the frontier. The smell of death. Bring Donnelly answers the door. And Jake barely recognizes her. The woman who'd arrived just 6 months ago looking fragile but alive, now stands gaunt, hollow-eyed. Hands trembling like she hasn't slept in weeks. Her dress hangs from a body that's lost frightening weight. Strands of hair at her temples have turned grey. When she speaks, her voice cracks like it hasn't been used in months. The winter, was difficult, she whispers. We lost, we had complications. Jake steps inside. And what he sees will become critical evidence in unraveling the Donnelly secret. Bring is in the middle of giving birth. Alone, except for her teenage daughter, Moira, acting as midwife. But this isn't chaos. It's organized. Methodical. Like they've done it before. The infant emerges. And Jake's stomach drops. Its spine twists in an unnatural S shape. Its left arm ends in a clubbed hand with only 3 fingers. Its head is grotesquely large, the forehead sloping in a way Jake knows means severe brain malformation. The baby wheezes, struggling for air. Its cries barely more than a weak, pitiful mewl. And Jake realizes. This isn't the first time the Donnellys have faced a birth like this. The question is, what will they do next? The baby's breathing was shallow, the cries faint. But still alive. Still fighting. And yet, what shook Jake Harrison wasn't the deformities. It was the family's reaction. No panic. No grief. Not even a flicker of compassion. Patrick and Bring locked eyes. Speaking in rapid Irish Gaelic Jake couldn't understand. Their tone wasn't one of shock. It was the calm precision of people following a procedure. Patrick finally spoke in English. His voice flat, almost bored. The child won't survive the week. The mountain air is too harsh for one so delicate. God's mercy, really. Better to take them young than let them suffer. But Jake could see the truth. The infant's breathing was strong enough. The cries, weak but steady. This wasn't mercy. It was a decision. Jake offered to ride to Helena for a doctor, pleading that even deformed children sometimes lived with proper care. Patrick's pale blue eyes hardened. The air in the room dropped cold. We know how to handle our own troubles, he said. His hand gripping Bring's shoulder like iron. It's the Lord's will. Some children aren't meant for this world. To interfere would be a sin against nature itself. It sounded rehearsed. Like a speech he'd given before. And in his tone, Jake heard something else. A warning. Outside, Seamus and young Declan returned from their chores. They didn't even blink at the sight of their mother in labor. Or at the malformed newborn in her arms. They'd seen this before. 2 weeks later, Jake came back on his usual mail run. The baby was gone. Bring met him at the door, eyes rimmed red. But dry. Empty. Lost the baby 3 days after you left, she said without emotion. Buried him behind the cabin. Next to the others. And then, she said the words that would stay burned in Jake's mind forever. The weak never last long up here. Don't survive out here, and it's better that way. Her words froze Jake Harrison in place. But it was the next phrase that cut deeper. Next to the others. Jake's eyes followed her gesture. Behind the cabin stood a row of small wooden crosses. Fresh earth mounded beneath each one. For graves. All too small for adults. Dates carved into them, all within the past 8 months. The truth slammed into him. Multiple infants gone in their first year in Montana. And not a single death reported to territorial authorities. Something about the graves was wrong. Harrison had buried enough people to know. These were dug in haste. The soil churned like the work of someone rushing. Or panicking. The crosses? Perfectly uniform. Pre-made. Not crafted in grief for each loss. But as if the family was expecting more. Even the spacing was deliberate. Leaving room for more graves. That summer, Jake began watching the Donnellys closely on his mail runs. And what he saw wasn't survival. It was control. The children moved like soldiers. Measured, cautious. As if every action was being judged. Their glances carried silent messages. The kind you only develop when keeping dangerous secrets. Moira, 17, and Colleen, 15, worked the home like hardened women twice their age. Not just skilled, but mechanical. Their eyes? Haunted. They'd seen things no child should. When speaking to their parents, their voices held not respect, but fear. Seamus, the eldest at 19, had a stutter that worsened when Patrick entered the room. He'd flinch at sudden movements. And any time someone asked about family life, he'd start to answer, then clamp his mouth shut, as if remembering what happened to those who talked. And Declan, the youngest, looked the most normal, until the day Jake caught him, standing alone, staring at that row of graves, his face twisted in pure terror. Declan didn't look sad, he looked scared. And when Jake asked about his dead brothers and sisters, the boy whispered, "Sometimes babies aren't right, and Father says God doesn't want them to suffer, but sometimes I think maybe God didn't decide." Then, like he'd touched fire, Declan slapped a hand over his mouth. He didn't say another word the rest of the visit. Jake's unease deepened. Sometimes, when he approached the cabin quietly through the trees, he'd hear snippets of conversations he wasn't meant to hear. Talk of keeping the line pure, strength of the blood, and sacrifices our ancestors made to preserve what matters. They'd slip into Irish phrases Jake couldn't translate. But the tone felt ritualistic. Not simple family talk, but something older, darker. He'd hear references to the others back home, to what happens to the weak ones, and, most chilling, which children show the signs, and how to handle the imperfect ones. This wasn't just an isolated mountain homestead. This was a fortress. A place chosen specifically to hide a set of rules and practices that had existed long before Montana. By late 1875, winter came again. Snow swallowed the mountain passes, sealing the Donnellys off for the second year straight. No mail. No neighbors. No eyes on them. And it was during this second isolation that the true nature of their bloodline began to show, in ways that would eventually force the territorial authorities to act. That same autumn, Dr. Theodore Brennan arrived in Helena. He wasn't just a country doctor. He carried medical books, theories, and an understanding of heredity most frontier physicians didn't even know existed. A Vienna graduate, trained further in Berlin and Edinburgh, Brennan had learned under men who were just beginning to piece together the puzzle of how traits and defects passed through generations. Dr. Theodore Brennan's medical library wasn't the kind you found on the frontier. It held rare volumes by Francis Galton and other early thinkers whose work hinted at the science that would one day be called genetics. Brennan knew things most doctors wouldn't understand for another half-century. But Brennan wasn't in Montana chasing glory. He was hiding. Back in Europe, his research into hereditary traits had led him to dark conclusions. That controlled reproduction could improve the human race. He'd said it openly. Too openly. The backlash was swift and vicious. By the time he boarded a ship west, he was a pariah. Montana promised anonymity. No institutions. No oversight. Freedom to explore ideas that respectable society wanted buried. The very same kind of freedom the Donnellys had come here to protect. In February 1876, that shared shadow of secrecy brought him his first whisper of the family's existence. Jake Harrison, weathered, wary, and not a man easily spooked, showed up in Brennan's Helena office after riding the dangerous winter trail. He described things Brennan couldn't dismiss as mere frontier hardship. "I've been carrying mail in these mountains for 8 years," Harrison said. "I know the difference between trouble and something wrong." There were lights in the Donnelly cabin at hours no one on the frontier would waste precious fuel. Smoke from the chimney at strange temperatures. And sounds. Crying, Harrison said, that goes on for hours, then stops. Not like someone's comforted. Like someone threw a switch. Then there was the singing. If you could call it that. Melodies warped and twisted, like they'd been written for voices that weren't quite human. And sometimes, in the middle of white oak blizzards, Harrison swore he saw figures moving outside, when no sane soul should have been able to survive a minute in that cold. Imagine being trapped in a blizzard so brutal, stepping outside could kill you in minutes, and through the swirling snow, you spot giant figures moving, too tall, too smooth, walking like nothing human you've ever seen. That's exactly what Harrison swore he saw. Brennan, a medical professional, heard the story and his instincts went on red alert. Something was seriously wrong. But here's the problem, reaching the Donnelly cabin was impossible. We're talking mountain passes buried under killer snowdrifts, a trip so dangerous it was basically suicide. And the Donnellys? They'd never asked for help, not once. So Brennan went on a different kind of mission, an information hunt. He dug deep into Irish immigration records, searching every dusty archive he could find. And that's when things got weird. Their official story? They were poor farmers from County Cork, escaping famine in the 1860s and 70s. But parish records showed nothing. No relatives. No farms. Nothing matched. And the most suspicious part? They'd arrived in Montana loaded with gold. Enough to buy land, travel across the continent, and vanish into the mountains. But Brennan wasn't done. In the depths of New York immigration files, he found the smoking gun, a Donnelly family passing through Ellis Island in 1874, flagged by medical inspectors. The notes were chilling: elongated limbs, strange skull shapes, unnatural joint movement. Then the trail went dead. Follow-up notes? Gone. Passenger logs? Altered. It was like someone with serious power made sure the Donnellys' past was erased. The truth hit Brennan like a punch: this wasn't just a frontier family with bad luck. They had been hiding something, long before they even set foot in America. And whatever it was still out there, moving through the snow. Imagine walking into Ellis Island in the late 1800s, thousands of hopeful immigrants flood through the gates every single day. But hidden in that crowd was a family whose very existence could be a ticking time bomb. Dr. Samuel Morrison had seen it all: sickness, desperation, tragedy. But this family stopped him cold. Their children? Something was off. The medical report was blunt: genetic abnormalities, strange developmental delays, and parents who acted like they had something to hide. When Morrison pressed for their family history, the father's eyes went cold, the mother's voice shook, and suddenly, every question was met with hostility. He flagged them for immediate detention. But then, boom, his order was overturned by higher-ups desperate to keep Ellis Island moving. The family walked free, and whatever secrets they carried went with them. Morrison's notes hinted at something bigger, not just medical issues, but a pattern of concealment, like they were trained to hide the truth. That's when Brennan, an investigator obsessed with the case, dug deeper, and made a chilling discovery. The name Donnelly kept appearing, in different states, decades apart, but always tied to tragedy. Pennsylvania, 1871, infant deaths piling up under mysterious circumstances. Ohio, 1873, child neglect investigation, abruptly dropped when the family vanished overnight. This wasn't coincidence. This was a web. A moving, shape-shifting network of related families, possibly linked by blood, and by the darkest of traditions. Brennan's mind raced: if this was one extended clan, they might have been breeding with intent, manipulating genetics, and quietly erasing their own children for decades, all while slipping across state lines to avoid the law. And now, as spring melted the snow from the Montana passes, Brennan couldn't sleep. He'd seen isolated communities with inbreeding issues before, but this felt orchestrated. Every relocation, every death, every smile in a family photo could be covering something unthinkable. And with every record he uncovered, one question kept screaming louder. If this family had been doing it for decades, how many more were still out there? In 1876, one doctor made a journey into the mountains, and stumbled onto a family secret so disturbing, it would change medical history forever. Brennan had seen disease. He'd seen tragedy. But nothing prepared him for the Donnelly case. The records were clear. This wasn't just bad luck or a medical anomaly, this was a family that had chosen to experiment on their own bloodline, no matter the cost to their children, or the community around them. When the brutal winter finally released its grip, Brennan made his move. He told the Donnellys he was coming for routine medical services. But that was a cover. His real mission? To see what they were hiding. The trip to their homestead was brutal, an entire day through terrain that felt designed to keep outsiders away. Dense forests swallowed the trail. Creek beds collapsed under his horse's hooves. The mountain slopes rose like walls. Not a single other traveler. Not a single sign of life. It was as if the Donnellys lived in their own sealed-off world. Then, the cabin appeared. Normal. Too normal. Well-built. Well-kept. The garden was thriving, livestock healthy, water systems smartly engineered. On the surface, they looked like the perfect frontier family. But Brennan's eyes weren't fooled. He noticed things. Small things. Things only a doctor would see. Behind the cabin, a cemetery. And here's where the air turned cold. The Donnellys had claimed they lost only a few infants to the harsh conditions. But Brennan counted 11 graves. 11. All too small for adults. The dates carved into the wooden crosses? Not random, like you'd expect from accidents or disease. No, they were evenly spaced. Deaths, on schedule. And the worst part? The graveyard was growing. Fresh earth. New plots being prepared. Brennan stood there, staring at those rows, and the truth hit him like a hammer. Whatever was happening here, it was still happening. What if I told you this family didn't just bury their dead, they prepared the graves before the deaths even happened? That's exactly what Brennan saw. Fresh tool marks scarred the trees. The earth was newly turned. It wasn't the aftermath of tragedy, it was a schedule. The Donnellys weren't hoping to avoid death, they were expecting it. Even the crosses over the tiny graves looked wrong, identical wood, same weathering, as if they'd been built in batches, not carved in grief after each loss. Patrick Donnelly greeted Brennan at the door. On the surface, polite. But underneath? A man on the edge. Brennan knew this wasn't the same man Harrison had described a year ago. Patrick's hair was now pure white, his face carved with deep stress lines. His hands trembled when he thought no one noticed. And his eyes, those eyes had seen something no man should see. "We don't need a doctor here," Patrick said firmly, but his voice betrayed him. It was less conviction, more a desperate hope to end the conversation. "We've always handled our own troubles, the old country way." Then Bring appeared. Brennan's breath caught. The woman who had given birth barely a year ago now looked skeletal. Her clothes hung from her frame like they belonged to someone else. Her hands shook constantly, whether from malnutrition, neurological damage, or sheer psychological collapse, Brennan couldn't yet tell. She tried to speak. Patrick cut her off with just a look, sharp, cold, practiced. A look that said speaking out had consequences. And then Brennan saw the children. Moira, the eldest at just 18, was heavily pregnant. Too pregnant. The timeline didn't add up, unless conception had happened during the long, snowbound winter when no outsiders could have reached them. That realization hit Brennan like a punch to the gut, because if no one had been there, then the truth of who the father was could be far darker than he ever imagined. The moment Brennan stepped inside, he realized, this wasn't a normal family. It was a genetic puzzle wrapped in fear. Colleen, just 16, looked far older than her years. Her body had developed unnaturally fast, her features unsettlingly complete. Brennan's medical mind screamed hormonal or genetic abnormalities, but her behavior was even more alarming. She moved with a practiced submissiveness, the kind learned through years of experiences no teenager should endure. Then there was Declan. 13 years old, but his face was split in two stories. One side normal. The other frozen in growth, twisted and malformed. He limped heavily, his spine likely bent, his fingers long and unnervingly flexible, the classic signs of a rare connective tissue disorder. Brennan knew immediately, this wasn't random. The family's interactions were worse. Every older child obeyed their parents like soldiers under threat. No smiles. No spontaneity. Just carefully measured movements, as if they knew one wrong step could bring consequences far beyond normal discipline. Seamus, the eldest at 20, was the most broken. His stutter was so severe he could barely speak. Anytime Brennan asked about family life, Seamus would start to answer, then shut down mid-sentence, eyes flashing with the memory of what happened to those who spoke too much. And then Brennan noticed the home itself. Most frontier cabins were simple and open. This one was carved into too many rooms. Heavy curtains blocked every sight line. Doors inside the home were locked. This wasn't a house. It was a fortress of secrets. The Donnelly cabin wasn't just a home, it was a maze built to hide things. Heavy curtains blocked every sight line. Locked doors sealed off whole sections. From behind the walls came strange noises, low, deliberate, and secretive. And then, the smell. Medicinal. Organic. But twisted, like something between a hospital and a grave. Brennan was about to leave when Patrick grabbed his arm. His voice was urgent, almost desperate. He kept glancing over his shoulder like someone was watching. "Doctor," Patrick whispered, "sometimes God tests families in ways that demand terrible choices. Would you understand? Could you help without asking questions?" Brennan froze. Patrick's words dripped with meaning. This wasn't about sickness. This was about something older, darker. "Our bloodline carries strength, but also complications," Patrick said, his voice trembling. "We've managed them for generations. In the old country, our ways were accepted. But here in Montana, people ask questions we can't answer. They wouldn't understand our burdens, or the methods we use." Brennan felt the chill crawl up his spine. The Donnellys weren't hiding because they feared gossip. They were hiding because they perfected, over centuries, a set of practices that would shock even the wildest corners of frontier society. 2 months later, the truth came knocking, literally. A trapper appeared at Brennan's door, his face pale from the brutal trail. He handed over a scrap of paper with a scroll that made Brennan's heart stop. "Donnelly woman in bad labor. Family asking for doctor. Something wrong beyond normal birthing troubles. Come quick if you can." For the first time in Montana, the Donnellys were calling for outside help. And Brennan had no idea what horror was waiting inside. For the first time ever, the Donnellys broke their iron rule, they asked for outside help. That alone meant one thing, something had gone horribly wrong. Brennan rode hard through the sweltering July heat. The valley was an oven, air so thick with humidity it felt like breathing through wet cloth. But the real suffocation began when he stepped inside the cabin. The smell hit him first: sweat, blood, and something else. Sweet. Wrong. The kind of smell his instincts screamed to run from. In the back room, Moira Donnelly lay on a rough-hewn bed, her face pale and drenched in sweat. She was in labor. But this wasn't any ordinary birth. Brennan froze. She was delivering twins, conjoined at the torso, sharing what looked like major internal organs. In 1876, that meant one thing: no hope of surgical separation. But the horror didn't stop there. What shook Brennan wasn't the medical nightmare, it was the family's reaction. No panic. No grief. No desperate prayers. They moved like a machine. Patrick and Bring worked in silent, precise rhythm, following a set of steps they clearly knew by heart. Seamus and Colleen laid out tools, not for celebrating life, but for controlling a crisis. Brennan's gut tightened. This wasn't the first time they'd faced this exact scenario. The twins were unlike anything he'd seen. One stronger, one weaker, yet both breathing, both alive. With the right care, they could survive for days, maybe weeks. Patrick turned to Brennan, his face like stone. "Doctor," he began. And Brennan knew, whatever came next, it wouldn't just be medicine. It would be a choice between life and something far darker. Hidden under a birthing bed, a discovery so disturbing it could shatter everything you believe about morality and family loyalty. Brennan froze. Patrick's voice was calm, too calm, as he asked, "Tell us honestly, can they be separated?" Can one survive as a normal child? But when Brennan leaned in to examine the conjoined twins, his heart nearly stopped. Not just because of the shared organs, the impossibility of the surgery, or the grim odds, but because of what he saw tucked beneath the bed. A stack of leather-bound journals. Thick, heavy, and horrifying. Page after page, decades of drawings so precise they looked like the work of a medical school, except these weren't research specimens. They were newborns. Some with cleft palates. Some missing limbs. Others with extra fingers, twisted spines, even faces that had never fully formed. Each drawing was paired with detailed notes, Irish, Gaelic and English, meticulous records spanning over 50 years and following the family from Ireland to America. But these weren't just observations. They were evaluations. Judgments. Cold, quality-of-life assessments, deciding which infants would be allowed to live, and which would not. Brennan's stomach churned. This wasn't frontier medicine. This was generational breeding control, human life reduced to bloodline, purity. Bring stepped forward, her eyes hard as iron. The bloodline must be kept pure. Weakness cannot spread. What outsiders call cruelty, we call mercy. Her voice was unwavering, like someone reciting a sacred prayer. But this mercy wasn't compassion. It was a calculated system, perfected over generations. And as Brennan realized, the Donnelly family wasn't just practicing infanticide. They were perfecting it. This family kept a secret for over 200 years, and it's worse than anything you've ever heard. Brennan thought he was here to help two conjoined twins. But within minutes, he uncovered a hidden truth that would rewrite everything he knew about medicine, ethics, and humanity itself. Beneath the birthing bed, leather-bound journals, dozens of them, filled with disturbing medical drawings of deformed newborns. But that was just the surface. Inside were genealogical charts tracking one bloodline for over 5 generations, revealing a horrifying truth. Patrick and Bring weren't just husband and wife. They were first cousins. And this was no accident. For over 150 years, the Donnelly family had been deliberately inbreeding, marrying cousins, even closer, just to preserve what they believed were superior traits. But this wasn't love. This was a human breeding program, borrowed straight from livestock farming, designed to cull weakness from their bloodline. It started in Ireland in the 1800s, when Patrick's great-grandfather became convinced he could improve the Irish people through selective breeding, twisting biblical genealogies and racist pseudoscience to justify it. Generation after generation, they kept the pattern going, trading human compassion for control. Every abnormal birth was recorded, studied, and assessed. If the child was unfit, it never saw its first birthday. And now, these twins gasping for breath weren't a random tragedy. They were the final, unavoidable outcome of 2 centuries of genetic tampering. Brennan's stomach turned. This wasn't just infanticide, it was the climax of a multi-generational experiment. But the worst part? The Donnelly family didn't see themselves as killers. They believed they were saviors, keeping the bloodline pure at any cost. And what Brennan discovered next would make everything even darker. This family spent over 200 years running the most disturbing human experiment in history, and tonight, Brennan had to decide if 2 newborns lived or died. In a freezing mountain cabin, 2 conjoined twins were struggling for every breath, one heart barely keeping 2 bodies alive. No advanced equipment. No surgical team. No time. Brennan knew doing nothing would condemn them to hours of agony. But with what he had here, saving them was impossible. That's when he found the journals, hundreds of pages that turned this tragedy into something much darker. These weren't just family records. They were a blueprint for a 200-year human breeding program. The earliest entries, written in faded brown ink, told the story. In the 1790s, Fergus Donnelly, the family patriarch, met with so-called learned men who claimed they could improve humans the same way farmers bred stronger cattle, faster horses, and more resilient sheep. Fergus was sold. He believed he could create a perfected Irish bloodline, smarter, stronger, and morally superior to the weakened peasants around them. The method? Intermarriage within the family, cousins marrying cousins, justified with twisted biblical genealogy. And at first, it worked. The first generation showed intelligence, striking looks, and what the Donnellys saw as proof of their superiority. But the truth? Every success came at a cost. And Brennan was holding the proof of what happened when this experiment went too far. The twins gasping beside him weren't a random tragedy, they were the inevitable result of over 200 years of deliberate inbreeding. And what Brennan learned next made him realize the horror wasn't over. In the first generation, some infants were born with severe deformities, and the Donnellys quietly ended their lives through what their journals chillingly called a merciful release from earthly suffering. As the decades went on, their genetic experiments became more organized, more calculated, more dangerous. Each new patriarch upgraded the breeding program, adding stricter rules and more twisted logic for why certain children had to die. The journals listed what was considered desirable: pale blue eyes, razor-sharp facial features, unusual height, mathematical brilliance. And what meant elimination, visible deformities, mental disability, or even vague, behavioral irregularities. Then came the most disturbing find, an entire section labeled Enhancement Protocol. It described an intentional plan to speed up the concentration of these ideal traits through closer and closer family pairings. Patrick's generation was the grand finale of this nightmare. He and Bring were not only first cousins, they were the result of 4 straight generations of calculated inbreeding, designed to force the family's superior traits to dominate. And in some ways, it worked. The surviving Donnellys showed high intelligence, eerie physical uniformity, and certain skills that made them stand out from their neighbors. But the cost? Catastrophic. Birth defects skyrocketed. The older children showed severe mental instability. Even Patrick and Bring were visibly deteriorating. The experiment was collapsing in on itself. When Brennan confronted him with the journals, Patrick finally admitted. My great-grandfather believed he was creating a superior race. He learned from Ireland's top horse and cattle breeders, men who created animals of exceptional quality through selection and controlled mating. He believed centuries of poverty had weakened our people, and it was our duty to restore them. Imagine being trapped in a family where your very blood decides your fate, and the wrong DNA could get you killed. That was the Donnelly family, 4 generations deep into a genetic experiment they believed would make them the most superior humans on Earth. Patrick stood there, voice shaking between pride and doubt, telling Brennan, we were going to reclaim our rightful place, by perfecting our bloodline. And for a while, it looked like it worked. Children born brilliant. Beautiful. The kind of people who could have changed the world, if the world had accepted them. But then came the truth. The horrific cost. So many children born wrong. So many quietly erased. Patrick called it mercy. Brennan called it murder. What Brennan knew, and Patrick refused to see, was that their so-called perfection wasn't perfection at all. It was genetic destruction. Every generation stacked hidden recessive damage deeper and deeper into their DNA, until it became a ticking time bomb. A bomb that would wipe out their family line forever. And now, the bomb had gone off. In front of Brennan, in a freezing mountain cabin, 2 conjoined twins gasped for air in a makeshift cradle. They weren't the beginning of a perfect future. They were the ultimate proof that the Donnelly experiment had failed. 5 generations of deliberate inbreeding had created a nightmare too big to hide, and too dangerous to continue. Patrick and Bridget thought they were about to solve the problem the way the Donnellys always had, eliminate the evidence. But Brennan knew the truth, this wasn't just another sick family ritual. He was staring at America's first hidden eugenics program. A century-long secret that had left a trail of murdered infants and broken minds across 2 continents. Now, the confrontation over these twins wasn't just about saving 2 fragile lives, it was about stopping a twisted legacy. This was the final showdown between one man's warped dream of human perfection, and the raw, unstoppable reality that nature always wins. This was it, the moment everything came crashing down. Dr. Brennan stood in the Donnelly cabin, staring at Patrick, knowing the next few minutes would decide the fate of two struggling infants and the end of a 100-year genetic experiment. For generations, this family had lived off the grid, hidden deep in the mountains, running what they believed was a mission from God to create the perfect bloodline. But Brennan had seen the truth: a century of inbreeding, genetic damage, and murder. Now, with the conjoined twins fighting for breath, Brennan made his move. He invoked his authority as the territorial physician and threatened to call in federal marshals if the Donnellys touched the babies. For the first time, the family realized their secrets couldn't survive in an America that was becoming more connected, more watchful. The twins only lived for 3 days. Brennan did everything possible with the crude medical tools in that mountain cabin, but their shared heart couldn't keep them alive. They passed quietly before dawn on the 3rd day. But their short lives changed everything. They became the undeniable proof that the Donnelly experiment had failed, and that the horrific consequences could no longer be hidden or justified. With their deaths, Brennan finally had the legal power to dig deeper. He began investigating, and what he found was beyond anything he'd imagined. Behind the cabin, 11 tiny graves. Inside, decades of medical journals and family records. Piece by piece, the truth emerged: systematic infanticide, stretching back generations. At least 23 children killed, some born with visible deformities, others with behaviors the family deemed unacceptable. With the evidence stacked against him and facing possible execution under territorial law, Patrick Donnelly broke. He revealed the entire truth. It had started in Ireland, early 1800s, with his great-grandfather Fergus, a man obsessed with creating a perfect Irish bloodline, using breeding methods taken straight from livestock farming. It was supposed to be the dawn of a superior family. Instead, it became one of the darkest secrets in American history. This family believed they were saving humanity, but in reality, they were destroying it from within. Fueled by fake science, twisted religion, and the dangerous rise of social Darwinism in the 19th century, they convinced themselves that killing their own children wasn't murder, it was genetic stewardship. Their mission? To create humans superior to the degraded masses. But the cost? Utter devastation. Patrick, the patriarch, lived under crushing anxiety and depression, his mind slowly unraveling as inbreeding's consequences became undeniable. Bridget? She'd suffered multiple mental collapses, her eyes haunted from years of helping kill her own children, something Brennan instantly recognized as severe PTSD. The surviving children told their own silent horror story. Seamus, the eldest son, cracked completely when questioned. He'd been forced to take part in killing his siblings since the age of 12. His severe stutter, inability to look anyone in the eye, Brennan knew the trauma was irreversible. Moira and Colleen were living proof of the family's genetic gamble gone wrong. Their bodies and minds bore the scars of generations of inbreeding. They had been raised, conditioned, to accept their roles as breeding stock for the next generation. The signs of sexual abuse were undeniable, suggesting their father planned for them to marry their own brothers. And then, there was Declan, the youngest. His twisted spine and physical deformities made him the most visible reminder of the Donnelly experiment's failure. But Declan was also a ticking time bomb for the authorities, a living child whose existence could no longer be hidden, explained away, or erased. What started as a mission to purify bloodlines had spiraled into one of the darkest family legacies in American history. And Brennan was about to rip the whole thing open for the world to see. This boy's spine was twisted, his face asymmetrical, and every day, his body got worse. But that wasn't the real tragedy. Declan had survived a lifetime of horrors, years of watching his own siblings killed, abuse so severe it shattered his mind. Brennan knew this child was a danger to himself, and possibly everyone around him. Then, one night, gone. Declan vanished into the Montana wilderness without a trace. No body. No footprints. Nothing. Meanwhile, the law had no idea how to even prosecute the Donnelly parents. Their crimes spanned generations, decades of genetic experiments and systematic child killings. The territorial prosecutor was lost, struggling to find charges for a case no one had ever seen before. The defense lawyers? They went for shock value, claiming Patrick and Bryn weren't criminals at all, but victims of hereditary mental illness. News of the case traveled, but slowly. This was the 1800s, and the Donnelly homestead was deep in isolation. Evidence was scattered. Testimonies vanished. Most of the public never learned the full truth. Then, fate intervened. Patrick Donnelly died in custody, a sudden stroke, maybe from the crushing stress of having his life's masterpiece exposed as a complete disaster. Bryn followed soon after, dying from complications in yet another pregnancy, one that ended in a severely malformed stillbirth. It was the final, grotesque symbol of the family's failed dream of genetic perfection. Dr. Brennan documented everything. His medical reports became some of the earliest evidence linking close family marriages to skyrocketing birth defects. These findings went public, but not everything did. Brennan hid the darkest truths, the infanticide, the abuse, the psychological destruction. Only after his death in 1923 did the real story emerge, buried in his private journals. And inside, Brennan confessed the question that haunted him for life: how could human beings do this to their own children? They murdered their own children for a dream that never existed. Brennan's private notes told the truth: the nightmares never stopped. He kept seeing the conjoined twins, hearing the silence of the infants he couldn't save. And the guilt, it never left him. After the Donnellys were arrested, their mountain homestead was left to rot. No relatives came forward. The land reverted to the territory. And locals? They stayed far, far away. The winters were brutal, but the real reason? Everyone knew the horrors that had happened there. The cabin became an accidental monument, not to the family's genius, but to the absolute danger of unchecked human experimentation. Out back, the cemetery told the rest of the story. 11 small crosses, and more unmarked graves hidden in the frozen soil. Each one, a victim of the world's first systematic human eugenics experiment, an experiment that failed catastrophically. Those crosses didn't just mark graves. They screamed a warning: when you put genetic purity above human love, you lose everything. And here's the twist: the Donnellys weren't alone. In the decades after their exposure, other isolated American communities revealed chillingly similar experiments. The evidence piled up, forcing America to rethink marriage laws, strengthen child protections, and increase government oversight on places too far from the public eye. The Donnelly case changed science and law forever. Their crimes provided early proof of how heredity worked, and how easily it could be abused. Their infanticides became part of the reason family-based eugenics would never survive in America again. It's more than a dark history. It's a warning. Because if it happened once, it could happen again. This wasn't just a family gone wrong, this was America's first secret human breeding experiment. For over a century, the Donnellys played God, and failed. Their story is proof that when isolation, desperation, and junk science collide, the results are beyond horrifying. It's a brutal reminder: when you treat people as lab experiments instead of human beings, you lose not only your morality, but your soul. This is one of the darkest intersections of family secrets, primitive genetics, and the Wild West's tolerance for communities that lived completely outside civilized rules. But here's the question: did we really uncover everything? What if other families were doing the exact same thing, hidden deep in the frontier, far from law, far from prying eyes? What if there are places even now where experiments like this are happening, and no one's watching? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Do you think this was an isolated nightmare, or the tip of something much bigger? And if you want more stories that'll make you question everything you thought you knew about human nature, hit subscribe, ring the bell, and share this with someone who thinks the past was simpler. Trust me, the truth is anything but simple.